So in today's video, I wanted to continue on the topic of the roots of the Trinity found in the Hebrew Bible. And last time we went over Hagar and the angel of the Lord. And now we're just fast forward just a few chapters to chapter 18. We're going to look at the story with Abraham and Sodom and Gomorrah and how there's a few parts in these next two chapters that point to a higher complexity to God, a plurality to God, and we're also going to talk about the tetragrammaton, which I don't know if you all watched my last video where I talked about how the tetragrammatron is Yahweh. It's the Y, the H, the W, and the H. And us in English, we put the vowels in there to make it say Yahweh. But in Hebrew, it's known as the tetragrammatron, and it's known as also the name, which in Hebrew they say Adonai, which means the name, because Jewish culture still to this day says the name is too holy to be said. This is the name in which God has revealed himself in the Hebrew Bible. And so we're going to look at two different instances of that in these two chapters and how it points to the Trinity. So with that being said, I'm just going to read through these chapters very loosely and going to highlight some of the verses that I want to look at. So starting in verse 18, we see, and it says already right from the start, and the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And he's talking about Abraham. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, three men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground, and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Long story short, God, the Lord, right here, which if I highlight this word, it's Yahweh. You see? You see how right here, this is technically what it says in the Hebrew, but us in English, we add the A and the E, the Yahweh. So this is the tetragrammaton. So it's important anytime that you see that in the Old Testament, us in English, it pops up in all capital letters, but always make a mental note when you see that capital, all capital, Lord. There's times when God, Yahweh is talked about and it uses the word Lord with just an uppercase L and the rest of them are lowercase. Most of the time when that happens, it's the word Elohim, which is a supernatural spirit being. There are other times where other supernatural spirit beings are referred to as Elohim in the Bible. And so don't be confused and think that it means that they are necessarily God himself. You have to look at the context and how the sentence structure is set up. So sometimes it might say Elohim, but it's still talking about the one true God, Yahweh. But there might be times it uses the word Elohim and it's talking about other gods, or you could say other like supernatural spirit beings, demons, whatever that other nations have. Like for instance, the Bible talks about Moloch, which is demon, the devil, but other nations worship him as Lord, as a god. There's another one, Baal or Baal or Beelzebub. It's the devil, it's demons, but they're supernatural spirit beings. And so sometimes people will refer to them, or the Hebrew scriptures will refer to them as Elohim, although they are not actually God. But yet there's times that God will be referred to as Elohim, and he is the one true God. So you have to just pay attention to this stuff and make a mental note when you read the text and know the difference between the two. But the reason why I wanted to point this out about the Tetragrammatron is because the Lord appeared to him in a physical form. And if you guys remember any of the other videos I've done on this, we went over in very excruciating detail how God is spirit. How in the first verses of the Bible, the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. How we're made in the image of God. But yet the New Testament and Jesus, with the woman at the well, and John the Apostle tells us that God is spirit. So we know he's not physical. But yet here we are in chapter 18 of Genesis, and the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre with two other men. So he appears in physical form. So not a contradiction. The Trinity solves this issue, right? If you don't have the Trinity, then you have these contradictions, right? So just wanted to point that out, that this is the Lord appearing in physical form in front of Abraham. So moving forward, he tells Abraham they're going to have a son named Isaac. Sarah laughs, and God says, Did she laugh? And they're like, No. And he's like, Yeah, she did laugh. Well, then they take Abraham. If you see right here, we'll just fast forward. Verse 16. And the men rose up from thence and looked towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. And the Lord, Tetragrammatron, Yahweh, said, in this context, he's speaking to the other two that came with him. And the Lord says, "Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. And the Lord said, Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come unto me. And if not, I will know." So I wanted to read this part for you to all to understand. This is God in physical form speaking to these other two angels that come with him to appear to Abraham. And he says, "Shall I hide this from Abraham? What I am going to do, which I will do?" Okay. And then also notice here, "For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him." So he knows Abraham's future. Okay. And he also was the one who's saying, "Should I withhold what I'm going to do to Sodom and Gomorrah?" Also, I know Abraham's future. Okay. Now let's look at the third point. "I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come unto me, and if not, I will know." So he also hears their cries and their prayers, just like with Hagar and the angel of the Lord. It wasn't in the text presented to us that it's God, that it's Yahweh. Well, it was in the Tetragrammaton, but at the same time, it's presented as the angel of the Lord is here, but yet he's taking responsibility, he's taking ownership, and even Hagar herself recognized the angel of the Lord as the one who hears her prayers. Just like right here, you have the Lord appearing in physical form, saying to these two angels things and context clues that tells us he hears Abraham's prayers, he knows his future, and he's the one who's about to cast judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. But yet he's appearing in physical form. But yet we know that God is only spirit. Right? So you see this conundrum and how the Trinity solves it, and how the Trinity has its roots in these texts. So I'm going to fast forward all these next verses. These next verses are about Abraham and God basically bargain, and Abraham's like, if there's 45 in there, 45 righteous men in Sodom and Gomorrah, will you save it? God's like, okay, I will for 40. Abraham says, as if there's 35, will you for 35? Okay, I will for 35, for 30, for 25, for 20, for 20, for 5, 15, blah, blah, blah. And it goes all the way down to the very end, and there's none. There's no righteous people. So then we get to chapter 19, which is where all this kind of comes together. "And there came two angels of Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom." And we all know the story. People gather around Lot and these two angels in this house they're in, and they try to beat down the door to get inside to get them into you know what with them. And so it doesn't really work out too well for them. The two angels strike them all with blindness, and the two angels help get Lot and his family out of this town before they cast judgment on him. So there's really just one particular verse that we need to look at where you're going to understand the Trinity and how this all comes together. So let me look for it real quick. Okay, and so right here, when God spares Lot and his family, and yes, his wife looks back and she's turned to a pillar of salt. But continuing forward, God spares his family, God spares Lot. Well, then it says right here in verse 24, and this is where all of this ties in together, and this is where so much of the Trinity and the verses like this in the Hebrew Bible where it hinges on. And it's because it's the only way to interpret and understand these texts. It truly is. And so now, right here, this verse right here is where it all comes together. If we look right here at Genesis 19, verses 24, verse 24, we read, "Then the Lord," and pay attention, that's the Tetragrammaton. I'll even show it to you right here. "Then the Lord, Yahweh, rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." Well, who's this Lord out of heaven? Yahweh. So you have, then Yahweh rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Yahweh out of heaven. So you have Yahweh on earth with Abraham, and you have Yahweh in heaven. So there's two Yahwehs. So if you don't believe in the Trinity, you have to affirm that there are two Yahwehs. And so obviously, they anyone who is a reader of the Old Testament, follower of the Old Testament, but isn't a Christian, they don't believe in two Yahwehs. They believe in one true God, Yahweh. So how is it that Yahweh from earth is raining fire and brimstone from Yahweh in heaven? How is it that Yahweh in the beginning of verse 18 appeared in physical form if he's just a spirit? And how is it that this physical form Yahweh is taking responsibility, accountability for the judgment that's about to come upon Sodom and Gomorrah? How is it that this physical creature, if it is a creature, if it's not Yahweh, then it's a creature. How is it that this creature is taking on the name of the Lord, Yahweh, is also taking on the title of the one who can hear prayers, the one who has the authority to cast judgment, and the one who knows the future? He knew Abraham's future. Then, just a chapter later, we read that Yahweh rained fire and brimstone from Yahweh in heaven. And so it's verses like this that I feel like I want to share with others to teach and to show how the Trinity is found in the Bible, all through the Bible, but you have to think about the text critically. You also have to be, well equipped with some of this outside biblical information, such as like what with the Tetragrammatron. That's very useful information if you know it, and if you know what it means and how it changes how you read the text. Because, for instance, if you didn't know anything about the Trinity and you didn't know anything about the Tetragrammatron or anything like that, then this verse would just feel like awkwardly structured. But we believe that this is divinely inspired, so the Holy Spirit inspired Moses to word it in such a way to get across the point that it wasn't God in heaven raining fire and brimstone. It was God from earth raining fire and brimstone from God in heaven. And so, like I said, the Trinity finds its roots in the Hebrew scriptures. So, with that being said, Jesus Christ has died, Jesus Christ has risen, and Jesus Christ is coming again soon. Peace.